my attention. This is one of those mornings. I am actually completely and totally incensed at a video that I was sent by my friend Ben. Yes, you know who you are. Here it goes. It's about to spark a rant, and maybe you've seen it on the news. This is the latest from our dear friend, Tony Fauci.
Of course, when you make recommendations, if the primary goal, when you're dealing with a situation where the hospitals were being overrun in New York, intensive care units were being put in hallways, you have to do something that's rather draconian. And sometimes when you do draconian things, it has collateral negative consequences. Just like when you shut things down, even temporarily, it does have deleterious consequences on the economy, on the school children. You know that, but you have to make a balance.
Oh, man, I can't tell you, I don't know if you feel it, too, when you watch that. I mean, we've reported on this. This backsliding liar has, slowly just changed his tune over time. But the fact that now he himself is using the term draconian, that he brought draconian measures upon us. For all of you conspiracy theorists out there that were accused of exaggerating the situation and calling it draconian, well, guess what? Now the man himself is calling it draconian. Fauci admits he knew his draconian lockdown would have collateral negative consequences on school children and businesses and everything else that America holds dear. Now, I don't know if I'm going to go where you think I'm going to go on this because, as I've said before, I am politically marooned, okay? If you're expecting me to, take sides in some political perspective here, you've got the wrong guy. I grew up a progressive liberal in Boulder, Colorado, which I've said many times. I no longer adhere to those principles, nor do I accept all the principles of the Republican Party. But let me be perfectly honest, what this interview has done for me. Here's the first point. Like, in the end, he says he brings these draconian measures upon us, and that when you have to do that, because the hospitals were overrun. Why were the hospitals overrun? Because you totally misdiagnosed what's taking place here. You believe that ventilators were the only things that would work, and so all of these oxygen masks sitting next to beds all throughout your hospital were not allowed to be used. You had to quarantine and only use your ICU, which limited your hospital's capacity down to only the ICUs. So you were idiots in how you handled this and how you diagnosed it. Beyond that, even only using the ICUs in New York and California, wherever the hot spots were, you never touched one single bed in any of the Army hospitals. So I want to take a little bit of an issue with the fact that you're saying the hospitals were overrun. Overrun what? Where? They never filled a singular ancillary annexed hospital that was built anywhere in this country. But here's my real beef. We've talked about Tony Fauci, and he's the one sitting here now, well, we had to make a balanced decision. We had to take into account that the hospitals were overrun, therefore destroy all of your jobs, destroy your livelihoods, destroy your credibility, go ahead and destroy your children's lives, their education. Now we're behind in education, when we're compared to the rest of the world, and all of these other situations, suicide and drug use, and all of it went nuts because what? What balanced discussion? And this is the point I want to make. Who put Tony Fauci in charge? If there was discussions about the education of our children, were there educators in the room saying, maybe this isn't a good trade-off? Where were the businesses? Where were the discussions about what would happen to our economy? What would happen to our place in the world? What would happen to our deficit? What would happen to inflation in the future if we just handed out money because we took everyone's job away? And why was Tony Fauci the only guy making those freaking decisions? Because as Ron Johnson has told us, and Latipo, and those that got near him, we read Scott Atlas's book, you hear all of them were complaining to who? The guy that put him in charge, put Tony Fauci in charge, and I'm talking about President Donald Trump. So I'm gonna voice a little bit of a beef here because this is what struck me today. Who put this idiot in charge of our entire country? He knows barely anything about science. He's never treated anyone in his life. He certainly knows nothing about economics or how to take care of our children or our students or any of that. So why was he in charge? And as we're being abused by this moron, where was our president? Where were you, Donald Trump? Where were you? Picked this moron, and then you gave him the keys to our car and let him just drive us all off a cliff? I've had it. I've had it with blaming Tony Fauci. It is clear he is one of the most talentless morons that has ever walked this planet, especially when it comes to health. But our president put him not only in charge of our health, but in charge of our economy, in charge of our education, in charge of essentially our international global decisions. He was never qualified for that. We hired somebody to make these choices. Essentially, we hired our designated driver. It was Donald Trump. He had a really nice car. We all thought, let's go in his car. And he said he wouldn't drink. But instead, he goes to the party, finds the biggest drunken idiot he can find, the guy that is so full of himself, so drunk on his own power, so drunk on the only decisions he wants to make, so drunk on selling us on vaccines that will never work, so drunk on selling us on drugs that his friends are making, that he can barely crawl to the car. And you, Donald Trump, gave him the keys to our car, and 1 million of us died in that car accident. And more, and counting. So yes, we had an idiot at the wheel, but who put him at that wheel? I think it's time to start talking about this, because I'm really getting tired of it. Are we going to continue to say, oh, poor Donald Trump, or Donald Trump really meant well, or they just weren't listening to him? You're president of the freaking United States. Ron Johnson wasn't bowing down to his constituents. He wasn't bowing down to medicine. Neither was, DeSantis. Ron DeSantis wasn't either. Those are real leaders. They said, I don't care what my health department's saying. We're going to make some sense here. And by the way, we all said, well, Donald Trump was a businessman. He ran the country like a business. Really? Because our businesses were destroyed. We had a business president that had handed all of our business decisions to Tony Fauci. Seriously? And then stood back as our jobs were destroyed, as our schools were destroyed. All right, maybe you can say, oh, it's all Tony Fauci's fault. But it's a bit like having a babysitter that your parents have hired. Maybe they don't know that you're being inappropriately touched at home. But when you finally tell your parents and say, you know what? I don't like this babysitter. I don't like how they're treating me. They're making me feel bad and they're really hurting me. If your parents don't listen and your mom says to you, I'm sorry, your father has to get reelected and that's why he's going to not listen to you right now, then we all have a problem. That's right. As we hear this story more and more, Donald Trump didn't want to get rid of Tony Fauci because it might cost him the election, which, by the way, it cost him. It might cost him the election. So this rogue gunslinger we all want to talk about in Donald Trump, was he really that rogue? Was he really that different than every other politician that's only thinking about how they're getting reelected? Because that seems to be how the choices were being made. We didn't have a businessman looking at our country like a business and weighing whether it would be okay to destroy our lives and our families and our businesses in the face of a small group, 0.25% of people that were dying from this illness. And I'm sorry for those people, but you don't destroy your country over that. So I place blame on the guy that we hired to be our designated driver. You handed our keys to the biggest drunken idiot the world has ever seen. And for that, I believe you should be held responsible. I know a lot of you are going to be upset with me for saying it, but that's just where I'm at, and welcome to the high wire, okay? I am transparent with how I feel, and I'm sure, Donald, if you want to tweet out about it too, I'll listen to what you have to say also. But I'd like you to start talking about it. Why don't you explain why you were so completely powerless to an idiot that had nothing to do with our businesses or our schools or anything else and barely knew anything about the science. In fact, got it all wrong. Got it all wrong on the vaccines, got it all wrong on the drugs, got it all wrong on the lockdowns and the masks. Why did nobody, especially our president, do nothing to protect us from the world's biggest idiot? All right. Well, speaking of the idiot and decisions that he's made, there's a lovely drug when he was shutting down hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and all the things we're going to talk about today. You got a huge show coming up. I got Dr. Paul Merrick joining me. Really one of the world's greatest ICU doctors, had a 50% reduction in deaths compared to virtually everyone else in his field, yet his tools were taken away from him. We're going to talk about that. We've got legal cases now against a drug coming up, and I'm going to talk about it in a second. But what is that drug? It's this one. The one the idiot gave to all of us.